The waiter recommended a Basque liqueur called Izarra. He brought in the bottle and poured a liqueur glass full. He said Izarra was a flower of the Pyrenees, the veritable flowers of the Pyrenees. It looked like hair oil and smelled like Italian strega. Ernest Hemingway. The sun also rises.
Modern.
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 We're prepping for a voyage.
Modern.
The force of an old-fashioned equals whiskey mass times bitters acceleration.
Why don't you make that a double?
Modern bar cart.
What's shaking, cocktail fans? Welcome to episode 274 of the Modern Bar Cart podcast. I'm your host, Eric Kozlik. Thanks for joining me for another interview episode where I track down the best and brightest minds in the spirits and cocktail world so that I can share their secrets with you. This time around, I'm joined by my friends Henry Preiss and Alain, a duo of spirits experts sporting a collective century of wisdom in the distilling and import-export industry. They're here to taste and talk me through an herbal liqueur from the Basque region of France that's set to explode here in the US market with the highly allocated and restricted nature of green and yellow Chartreuse that's occurred over the last year or two. Izarra has a long and compelling history as a regional specialty from the mountainous borderlands at the junction of France and Spain, but it's virtually unknown here in the US. However, if Henry and Alain have anything to say about it, this duo of alpine liqueurs is about to rise out of obscurity and make its mark on the cocktail world. But before we start placing our bets on this herbal unicorn brand, let's take a pause so that you can make yourself a drink. This episode's featured cocktail is the Et moi, je te dis mode. To make it, you'll need 1.5 ounces of Armagnac, which is a French grape brandy, 1/4 ounce Izarra Jaune, or yellow, 1/4 ounce Luxardo Maraschino liqueur, and 1 dash of aromatic bitters. Combine these ingredients in a cocktail mixing beaker with ice, give them a good stir until they're properly combined, chilled, and diluted, then strain into a stemmed cocktail glass and enjoy. This is a Prohibition-era drink developed in France as an homage to a Bordeaux-born vaudeville-style actress named Maude Loti, nicknamed La Maude, who starred in dozens of hit plays throughout the 1920s and 30s. This cocktail is allegedly a creation of her very own, and it was published in a 1929 cocktail compendium called Cocktail de Paris. It also won her first prize in a celebrity cocktail competition that same year. But let's talk about what's going on in the glass with this drink. It's a not-so-subtle Manhattan riff. Alright, maybe it straddles the line between old-fashioned and Manhattan, but I think with the aromatized ingredients, we're definitely leaning more Manhattan in quality. But that's okay. There's nothing wrong with the Manhattan. The subtlety of any Manhattan lies in its execution. Most closely, the Et moi, je te dis mode reminds me of a rye and applejack cocktail called the Diamondback, which employs yellow Chartreuse as its sweet modifier. Here, instead, we're leaning on the mild nuttiness of the Maraschino liqueur and the elegance of the Izarra Jaune to be in conversation with the pot-distilled Armagnac and the spicy dash of aromatic bitters. This cocktail was dusted off and reintroduced to the world back in 2019 by bartender Frankie Marshall, but she was forced, back then, to use yellow Chartreuse to make it feasible for bartenders to mix. But guess what? Back in 1929, it was originally made with Izarra, and now that it's once again available in the US, I think it's only appropriate that we use the ingredient that Maude originally intended. So, now that you've got another piece of Prohibition-era cocktail history to add to your collection, let's turn our attention back to the interview. In this spirited discussion with Alain and Henry Preiss, some of the topics we discuss include what precisely Izarra liqueur is, and the geographic and cultural forces that allowed it to remain more of a regional specialty while Chartreuse enjoyed wider exposure. How other specialty liqueurs like Jaegermeister and Luxardo Maraschino manage to burst the bonds of their relative niche statuses and become heavyweights in the cocktail world. The unique culture and flavors of the Basque nation, a culture that transcends political and geographic boundaries and holds tenaciously to its own distinct identity, even in today's increasingly remixed and digital world. Then, of course, we taste through Izarra's two flagship offerings, Izarra Verte, or green, and Izarra Jaune, or yellow. We compare and contrast these spirits with their logical Chartreuse analogues and explore the best service methods and use cases for each. We wrap up the conversation by reviewing how Henry and his team are rolling out this beautiful duo of alpine liqueurs in liquor stores and bars across the country, and give you some insights on how to get your hands on a bottle. Along the way, we covered the medicinal underpinnings of all contemporary Genepese and Amari, the crucial role of the Armagnac region in the production of these Basque spirits, the one Izarra product that didn't quite survive the test of time, and much, much more. As I mentioned at the top of this intro, Henry and Alain have a combined 100 years of experience in their fields. It's hard to sit down with two people and benefit from that much sheer accumulated knowledge. And so when Henry says this Izarra thing seems to have some serious traction, guess what? I'm inclined to believe him, especially after tasting it. I hope that, like me, you'll soon have the opportunity to sample these two beautiful liqueurs and decide for yourself how they stack up against the 10,000-pound, 120-ingredient gorilla that is Chartreuse. Right now, these bottles are listed at Total Wine for about $60 a bottle, so we'll hope that that price point stays somewhat durable over time. But until you do get your hands on a bottle, please enjoy this fascinating deep dive with my friends Alain Royer and Henry Preiss. Alain, Henry, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Starting with Alain, perhaps, since Henry, you've been a guest here on the podcast before. So starting with Alain, can you both either introduce yourself for the first time or briefly introduce yourself to our listeners so that we understand who you are and what you do? Alain, take it away.
Like Henry, I've been about 50 years in the industry of spirits, cognac, liqueurs, and many other projects. I live in France. I have an upbringing in cognac, born and raised in cognac, did everything in the cellar that you can imagine, from grape picking, distilling, blending, aging. And in the course of my life, I started to make liqueurs and get into that world. That's about it, And I have a fantastic network in the US, boosted by my partnership with Henry and a couple of other people, but mainly Henry and his daughter Nikki. Now that we've reached a decent age, both of us, I must say we're having a fantastic fun in the trade.
Amazing. Well, we'll get into more of your background and expertise as we dive into the product here. But Henry, we've already had you on. This is back a couple of years ago at Tales of the Cocktail with another member of the Preiss Imports portfolio. But give us the 411. What do you do on a day-to-day basis?
So on a day-to-day basis, my number one priority is getting the boxes out the door that came in. But so like Alain, 50 years in the business, my family immigrated to America from Germany in 1961. My father at that time brought a few German spirits over. Along the way, a few years later, he picked up Jaegermeister. And then in 1974, I joined his company. Actually, I just came in to do delivery work. I had no intention of being in the liquor business. I was just going to make some money and help them out. And 50 years later, I'm here. A lot of it is because the business is very unique, very special. We've made a lot of friends like Alain and suppliers all over the globe. Some that have sold their companies. We built in the prior company, we built Cunamara for Cooley, which was their stepchild and became their star. For Luxardo, we built Luxardo Maraschino. And so we've had our hands on a lot of products, which is where this podcast is going to lead us to what just very well may be another one of those unicorns, because out of 50 years of doing this, 90+% of what you touch doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah, it's interesting too. I mean, I love that you just kind of you really gave us a time warp there, because here it is 2023. You both spent 50 years in the business, and you're dropping names like Luxardo Maraschino and Jaegermeister that I, as somebody who enjoys today's contemporary cocktail scene, am very well acquainted with. And most people like me understand these both to be incredibly successful brands. And so I think maybe the thread that we should try and trace here as we talk and taste our way through the subject of this interview is maybe what distinguishes those unicorns, as you mentioned, that kind of really rise to prominence from some of the products that may be equally as delicious, but never quite find their niche. So I'm going to leave that up in the clouds as an influence for us, a hanging question as we chat. But I think we should just dive right into it by asking Alain, as our French expert on the subject, what is Izarra liqueur?
Well, Izarra liqueur is a mountain liqueur. Everywhere in Europe, wherever there's a mountain, you've got these kind of liqueurs. Call it Genepi, call it Chartreuse, call it Izarra, and there are a few others. The list is too long to name. Most of the time, those liqueurs were not liqueurs. They were medicine, cure. They were there, grandmother recipes or old monk recipes to cure illnesses, plagues, or many, when your stomach was wrong, you took it. Then over the years, people were kind of reluctant of drinking those high-proof liqueurs made of maceration of herbs, spices, roots, leaves, or just name them. They took many. And then slowly they decided, well, let's make it more palatable. So from high proof, they were putting down the proof and then added probably a little sugar, diluting it with alcohol. And there we are. We came to liqueurs. And then people started to think, wow, that medicine is good to drink also. So you have many examples. I mean, you could talk about vermouth because it's the same story. You can talk about pastis, and it's just a normal evolution. And some of the liqueurs, of those liqueurs, have had a lucky story because they were on a exchange route, a route where you have traffic. So in the Rhone Valley, well, there you are. Chartreuse, you go down the mountain and you're on the Rhone Valley with the traffic between the Mediterranean, Paris, and then the shores. Talk about cognac. Cognac, it was obvious because there was a very gentle river bringing the product to a nice, safe harbor, and it could be shipped. Armagnac, no. Armagnac is in the middle of nowhere, the foot of the Pyrenees. So go to Chartreuse, you had the same thing. Locked at the foot of the Pyrenees, near the Atlantic Ocean, and in the Basque country, because the Basque always kept everything for themselves, It's it's a nation, it's not a country, it's a civilization living both sides of the Spanish border. They do their own things, they have their own language, which is very difficult to trace to. Nobody knows really where it comes from. It has Egyptian roots in their language, that's for sure. But nobody exported it because how did you do it? So this is how this gem, was developed locally. and became a liqueur because the local guys love to drink it.
Mm. So I'm going to kind of summarize that in my own words, make sure that I'm getting it right, and then maybe Henry can help us to continue elaborate on what kind of distinguishes Izarra, which is this Alpine style liqueur, from Chartreuse, the sort of case study that everybody in the world knows, or at least in the cocktail world. So you're saying that Chartreuse, well, being smack dab in the middle of France, maybe was a lucky thing for these monks. Anybody who wanted to get to or from Paris, to or from, the Côte d'Azur, especially during times before modern roadways, would very likely end up passing through this. So you get a lot of, kind of natural spread and diffusion of this. On the other hand, if you do look at where Izarra is made, it is in a problematically mountainous place, right up against the ocean, at the juncture of two modern nations, and in a region that traditionally Aragon had a lot of Aquitaine rather had quite a bit of political upheaval. So I having you put it in context like that makes me understand a little bit more about why maybe it has less spread than Chartreuse. But on the other hand, when I was looking at the research that you sent me, it seems like at certain points in the 20th century, Izarra was huge. So Henry, I don't know if you can maybe comment on some of that mystique that was built up in the early part of the 20th century.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? If we segue back just a little bit, Jaegermeister, right? Jaegermeister was already huge to a big extent in Germany. It was the workers' drink. You had a beer, Boilermaker kind of thing. Northern Germany, where it's quite cold, Jägermeister is a potent liqueur. And, beer was a staple in Germany, basically a food item. So it was strong there. Italians like bitter liqueurs. That was their first big market after Germany, because Italians, Amaro, Jägermeister's an Amaro. Over here, it was a struggle for me, for my father. We sold it to German clubs, German restaurants. Everybody else thought we were selling cough syrup and trying to poison them. And so it was a pretty tough sell initially. And then Sidney Frank Company came along, put a lot of money into it, along with the Mast family, the Mast company that owned Jägermeister. And so you can attribute that particular brand's meteoric rise directly to money. They hired a lot of girls, pretty girls. They did a lot of crazy advertising. They promoted it everywhere. It was a big budget item, like you would get from a global company, where Sidney Frank came from Schendley, which was the biggest liquor company of its day. Then you go to Luxardo, whole different animal. Luxardo, and the reason I'm doing this, because it's not Izarra, but I think it gives a little bit of an insight how these products get to where they get. So what you've got with Luxardo is that it was with the Terlato family out of Chicago. They decided, we don't want to be in the liquor business. We're wine people. We own wineries. We import wines. We're very successful. And they dropped all their liquor products. And so Luxardo was one of them. And they were actually doing quite well with it in the Midwest, which was their strength back in the 90s. And Daryl Cordy Brothers in Sacramento, very famous individual if you're old enough to remember, but Cordy Brothers is still a destination store in Sacramento, which, by the way, has placed a very large opening order for a single store for Izarra. But Daryl Cordy's friends with Franco Luxardo. Daryl knows everybody. He's encyclopedic on the industry, on food, beverage, table settings, culture. So Daryl said, you need to go talk to Henry. Well, my company was very tiny at that point. I had lost the prior company. We were maybe 6 years into the new company, which is Hodling today. And Franco and I visited maybe 3 times. He came over from Italy, and then he eventually gave us the brand. And so now I'm running around. I'm excited because it's historic. It just has a beautiful story and a beautiful family brand. And that's really what we attach ourselves to. And so now I'm running around tasting people in Luxardo. They go, what do I do with this? He says, I just, this stuff tastes odd. It's this, it's that. And I said, well, it's unbelievable in cannolis. It's famous for being used in Italian cannolis. It's unbelievable over vanilla bean ice cream. And then, so we're in the 90s. And as we move through the 90s and get to the 2000s and the cocktail culture starts, now Ryan McGarrian's doing aviation gin. He's calling up, hey, can I get a little Luxardo and some of your cherries? We want to make aviations. And that kind of starts rolling. And along the way, here's Chartreuse, which has been a famous brand, but it hasn't been on fire anywhere, and bartenders are looking to recreate cocktails, many of them that are historic, and the last word comes back. In that time frame, Luxardo, even before that, we started gaining momentum. The aviation cocktail, bartenders started making other creative cocktails with it because suddenly they were made aware of it by a particular event. And so, out of all the products, and I can go into hundreds of them over the last 50 years that we've tried, some lost, some launched and went on to other companies and got bigger and bigger because we don't own the brands, and tends to be what a lot of people like to do, let a little guy build it and take it away. But we try to prevent that these days. And back to the Chartreuse thing. So now we've got this liqueur that bartenders are in love with, and not just for the last word, but that's a signature drink of it. As Alain was doing some research, you saw some of the classic drinks, others that come up with that are in that presentation I showed you, that people make that are simple and things, but people like the liqueur. Of course, they like the story with the monks, and all these herbal liqueurs do go back to those pharmaceutical recipes where, like the Chinese with their teas and herbal things to, clean your liver and help your body heal itself. A lot of these concoctions started that way, and they get preserved with alcohol, and then you add sugar and suddenly it tastes pretty darn good. And we have this Chartreuse phenomena that now, for whatever reason, basically the monks don't want to make more. Anytime something starts selling and the producer says, I'm not going to make any more, everybody wants more. Yeah, and that's why I say a unicorn, because about 3 years ago, it was actually before COVID, Alain and I talked about Izarra. We didn't allow the 700 mLs in the US yet. And so, we're talking about it and we're going, well, all we could do is a stock bottle, just some bottle off the shelf to slap the label on, which is really a difficult way to go with a historic brand. You just don't carry the credibility without a trademark look. And then, the Chartreuse thing happened with them cutting back. The 700 mLs get approved by the federal government as a legal US size. And there we are suddenly. And I got to go back and revisit this product because, and I would have revisited it anyway, even the Chartreuse phenomena hadn't happened. But it happened. And, we took, I don't want to say we took advantage of it. I mean, you're not really taking advantage of anything. You never really know. There was skeptics. We gave the product. I had initial samples. We sent them to certain distributors. We had a distributor in Massachusetts, immediately ran it to a bartender and said, this isn't Chartreuse, which, of course, that's not magic. We know it's not Chartreuse. It's Izarra.
Right.
And, so they passed on it. And it's the first product in 50 years that I've come across that for us as a little specialty importer, we got instantaneous national distribution. We're in almost every state, or we will be, because we're way behind. You don't predict these things. You don't create these things with small brands with no budgets. Sometimes things happen that are kind of, I guess, like when an Instagram post goes viral.
Right. Yeah. There's definitely a virality to the Izarra phenomenon right now,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe what we should do now is, Alain, which of the two varieties should I taste first? Should I go Jaune or Verte?
Vert, you should go green because that's
Okay.
the iconic one.
Okay. Well, and so it's interesting that you bring that up because there are a few famous depictions of Izarra on posters, ads, I guess, and it seems like they're always showcasing the Jaune.
Oh, yes, because at the time, the Jaune was the easiest consumed because it was little mellower, little easier to consume. There was always a little honey to round the edges, smoothen it. The little touch of Armagnac made it very sexy.
It's interesting what Alain just said because on the June, the yellow, the honey, I am sure a lot of your listeners, especially right now, we're in the cold season and people are getting sore throats and getting colds. And a lot of the medications out there, right? The cough syrups and things, they have honey. Honey's sort of a healer in itself, right? They say that honeycomb, eating from the honeycomb is good to help you fight allergies and other illnesses and things.
Right.
There's a health aspect that wraps into historical, which of course you can't put in print, and you can't say about a spirit that has a medicinal value. But we all certainly drink a lot of these after dinner as digestives. And while I don't taste out of the 500 products we have, all of them very often, because we have a lot of them, I'm just sampling the Verte right now. I'm going, that's it, all on its own, not even cold. What a fantastic after dinner drink that is. It's just like it just has the feeling of like settling from a heavy meal.
On the nose is lovely.
The Glencairn is a perfect glass. Henry is using the shot glass because he's being reasonable. But
yeah, well, this is a lousy glass. But if it tastes great with a lousy glass, you can only imagine how good it's going to taste with a good glass.
But Eric, you're doing the perfect thing. So you're drinking it obviously at room temperature, perfect. Out of this glass, I would not suggest to put some ice in it because it tends to dilute it, but it can be a little easier. The best way when you're doing it neat is to put it in the freezer, even in the deep freeze. When it is ice cold, it becomes thick, mellow, gentle in the mouth. It is quite extraordinary. Same thing goes for the yellow, but this is how the green there. And when you have it ice cold, then I would say have it in a shot glass. Like in one of those small tequila shot glass. It is just perfect. And in the Basque country where Henry was with me, and we were not talking about Izarra, in November 22, the story of Izarra really started in April.
No, we started really talking about Izarra 3 months later. Here we were in the Basque country enjoying the food. It's so beautiful. It's just one of the most beautiful places you can be. It just has such a wonderful feeling, from the wild seas that are there to the beautiful rugged mountains to the food, the people. It's sort of, it is to France in a similar way that Alsace is to France. They're part of France, but they're different.
Right.
Totally different. So you've been tasting it. It's thick. It's flowery. It's elegant. It's broad. I mean, it has so many qualities, and it ends up beautifully a meal. Or you can have a shot any time in the day, of course. The yellow is more gentle. The yellow is less a conversation breaker, as would the green be.
Which, by the way, they're both 80 proof.
Oh, yes. which is not the case of Chartreuse. They have two different proofs. But you know what? Doesn't matter. Or I can hear the sugar on
Oh
the
yeah.
proof.
Oh yeah, he still has a little chartreuse. Both Alain and I have been trying to buy some bottles retail.
I have a tiny amount of the Jaune. I have no green chartreuse left, but I figured that I would do the side by side where I could. So I know our listeners are going to want to hear some tasting notes, and they're going to want to do some comparing and contrasting from chartreuse. Obviously, what everybody's eyes are fixed on, right? From the peanut gallery, from the audience here, the question we all want to know is, can I sub this in 1-to-1 for chartreuse? I'm not going to answer that question right now because I think ultimately the answer is sure or maybe. But I want to get the flavor notes. So for the green, I don't have the chartreuse to compare it to, but I've drunk a lot of chartreuse and I have a pretty reliable recall of that flavor profile. The difference visually is this has a different green than green chartreuse. It has a deeper green. It's lighter in saturation, but it's deeper in color. I'll say that again. It's lighter in saturation, so it's a paler green, but the green that is here as compared to green chartreuse is more of like a pine green than it is like a leafy green. I think the green chartreuse is more in the leafy as opposed to the pine. So that's compelling to me. This seems a little bit thinner in the glass, which is not necessarily like how it's going to act on the palate. And I'm noticing the big difference here. You get some notes that are very similar. You get the spearmint, you get the alpine flowers, you get the grass, you get some really nice base note spices, but there's a peppery note, almost like a lemon pepper that kind of runs through, almost like maybe even like a mustard seed in a way that kind of runs through the Izarra that is definitely absent from what I experienced in chartreuse. And so tasting this for the first time, that's really what I'm latching onto. I'm saying, ooh, this is different. And when every time I take a sip, I'm like, it seems like chartreuse. And then that little pepper note kicks in. I don't know, Alain, if there's some particular botanical that's doing that.
You are absolutely correct. I mean, we could mention all the botanicals, but I mean, the sum of the botanicals, the result is totally different than just a pure addition of everything. It's a conjunction of everything.
Right.
And it has this little peppery, anise, minty finish, thyme. I love the little thyme that you find at the back.
That's what stays at the very end, that kind of piney, almost like you're, in that wet, cold pine forest and you can really smell the trees. You're kind of, that flavor stays on your palate. The sugar is very subdued. It's nowhere near as sweet as Jaegermeister or, in fact, most liqueurs. But of course, alcohol cuts the sweetness, right? So it is 80 proof. The other thing I find, and I don't know if Alain agrees, but and of course I know this will come up later in various questions, but it's not 55 degrees or 110 proof, it's 80 proof.
And it holds itself at 80 proof.
Right, at different different spirits at different proofs. Some at a lower proof taste stronger than one at a higher proof, right? Depending on the sugar, again, the alchemy of the particular liqueur, And this has, to me, it has a pretty solid bite for 80 proof, So that
it does.
How that works in the cocktails, that'll be the mixologist magic that they do. And things, because it's it's its own product. It's not anything. It's not somebody else's product invented to fill a space. It is its own product and brand, and was loved for that.
So now I'm nosing the Jaune and the yellow Chartreuse side by side here. You may be able to tell on the video that there's a slight, this is the yellow Chartreuse here that I'm indicating. This is the Izarra Jaune. There's a slightly deeper yellow on the Izarra Jaune. What I'm getting from the Chartreuse is almost like I don't want to call it an artificial yellow, but it's almost more of like a turmeric-y, saffron-y yellow. Very, very bright. And it has some like high raisiny, dusty notes that you would that we all know and are familiar with from the yellow Chartreuse. But then once I get to the Izarra, it's a very different aroma. It's softer, it's rounder, it feels almost more homespun. It feels like something I would drink at home as opposed to in a fancy cocktail bar. It feels more rustic.
Craft. I would use the word, it's more craft. Chartreuse is more, quote unquote, industrial. I mean, I'm going to be killed for that word. But the Izarra is more local. It's more, it's, you feel the honey, the saffron, the citrus immediately.
Yeah. To me, it's got some gingerbread, the citrus.
Gingerbread's a great
cinnamon, coriander.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, very, very different from the yellow Chartreuse. And I feel like, all cards out on the table. We know a couple of things about the difference between green and yellow Chartreuse. 3 of them are important to me. One is the proof difference, 55% versus 40 at the yellow Chartreuse. One of them is the distillate base that goes into it. The green Chartreuse is a sugar beet base versus the yellow Chartreuse having the distilled grape base. So there's another difference between the two. But I think the big difference is people respect green Chartreuse in a way that they don't respect yellow Chartreuse. Yellow Chartreuse is only featured in a couple of cocktails and only in the amount of maybe a quarter to a half an ounce. Whereas you're going 3/4 of an ounce to an ounce of the green in any of like the last word format drinks. So it's always sort of a second class citizen. But I think when you put the green and the yellow Izarra side by side, it's more of a it's more of a conversation between the two. It's like, well, this one's more of your medicinal and this one is more of your sort of like winter. It just seems like they represent different seasons and different functions rather than one being drastically more interesting than the other. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Interesting too, Eric, is because as a little company, we rarely get a picture into a marketplace the size of the U.S. immediately. Usually it comes in little increments, and because our products will sell better in certain pockets. People that know the product or have traveled and want a product that we import or something. But this, because it went national, and it's interesting, without throwing companies out there that are carrying it nationally, in some stores, the allocation was more yellow than green.
Wow.
So it's a large company that took it national, and they have data that we would never have our hands on. So they have data on what yellow Chartreuse did in their stores when they could get it, what green Chartreuse did when they could get it. And so, it's made it hard for us to know what to order. The first shipment was 50-50 because that's what you do. And it wasn't huge, so it sold out. The second shipment, I go, well, we're certainly going to sell a lot more green than yellow. And we've been selling, I basically did, I think 60% green, 40% yellow. We've still been selling almost 50-50. And, and I don't have any basis yet from the full rotation, right? Once, product comes in, goes to distributors, goes to retailers or bars, gets used, and you get a second order. Really, by third orders from our distributors, we get an indication that, not only are they filling their pipeline, but the product's selling and people are buying it. And then you start really kind of seeing. But I totally agree. I mean, both of these are delightful. I mean, we're just tasting them straight on their own, no cocktail, nothing. Not even like Alain said, out of the freezer. I can only imagine how great the honey would be out of the freezer.
Oh,
Oh,
I'm
it's
sure.
Yeah.
it's it's delightful. You could put it on ice cream. You can put it. I mean, what you can do baking with those two, either yellow or green, is just fabulous. I'm having a
Well,
little.
and they'll flambe, right, Alon? They're 80
Yeah.
proof. They'll flambe. You could do a crepe Suzette with the honey. That would be fantastic.
So one of the things that I think it took me a while because I don't have an extensive background in Armagnac, but I think one of the things that I really like about the Izarra Jaune as compared to the yellow Chartreuse is that the character of the Armagnac that's used in the blending process really contributes some lovely notes to it. And, you know, uh, you get it less in the green just because the potency of the herbs is just at a different level, and that's fine. But I think it's nice that in the yellow that Armagnac comes out. So maybe this is a good opportunity, Alain, for you to kind of explain how the Armagnac gets brought into this. Obviously, it's a neighboring region to
Yes.
the Basque Country, but how does it get worked into the production process?
Well, you gave the answer a little earlier when you were saying that the yellow chartreuse was made with a spirit from grape. So there you are. I mean, the local spirit. I mean, where do you find a spirit with grape that could help smooth it, make more the liqueur more elegant? Was to use Armagnac, which was next door. Simple as
Right.
that.
And Alon, because Alon has dragged me through the Armagnac country quite extensively. And Armagnac itself is a unique brandy from cognac or other type of distillations.
And it gives an elegance that belongs to the category of the yellow, which is meant for a bigger, easier distribution.
I like that. An elegance and elegance.
Oh,
I couldn't agree
it's
more.
exactly that.
It really is. Now, uh, I want to talk a little bit about the future and what that holds for Izarra, but one thing we may have glossed over slightly, we've referenced to it, we've gestured at it several times, is the unique culture of the Basque Country, because we have a few enclaves of Basque immigrants here in the United States. Out west, there's a lot more folks of Basque descent than on the East Coast where I am. They have quite obviously we've got the Spanish Basque Country as being different than the French Basque Country. So I guess, how do we think about French Basque Country as opposed to Spanish Basque Country in terms of a culture, and or maybe a cuisine is more appropriate there? And then how do we think of, like, what to you seem to be hallmarks of Basque culture? Because the big cultural reference to Izarra is one from Hemingway in The Sun Also Rises. He said the waiter recommended a Basque liquor called Izarra. He brought in a bottle and poured a liqueur glass full. He said Izarra was a flower of the Pyrenees, the veritable flowers of the Pyrenees. It looked like hair oil and smelled like Italian strega. That is the big reference. But what is the Basque culture? What was Hemingway soaking in when he wrote that?
Well, he was deeply involved in the wars, and the fights that were going there. I would not separate the French Basque and the Spanish Basque. It's
Okay.
a nation with a common language. And they have very strong ties together. And for them, a border does not exist. They just cross from one place to the other. They have always have been the best smugglers of the in the region. But they have their own ways of living, their own language, their own drinks. The other drink out in Izarra is cider. You have cider companies absolutely everywhere. They fish. They love the sardines. They grill the sardines. It's a tight net community who lives on the both sides of the border. So yes, there's a very big Basque diaspora in the United States. You have Basque streets in San Diego. The first Basques who came there is because the families were big. They could not marry everybody and buy land and the thing. So some of them had to be priests, soldiers, custom guys. And then when there was no post, they gave them a little bag of gold and get out of there. And in the Basque country, in the 16th century, 17th, there was a lot of whaling. So they naturally came to the US in the San Diego area as, whalers. And then over the centuries, the Basque have always been very, very keen in cattle keeping, sheep and cows. When the immigrants came up from France, from Europe, should I say, keeping cattle was just a thing for the Indians. They were despised of them. So because the cowboys were not cowboys, the people going to be the Americans. It was the Basques, Bakersfield. Look at the cattle growing there, and then they went to
Right.
Reno, and then they went, and I think I counted with Henry about 40 Basque communities and associations around the country. They play the Basque pelota, this ball game against the wall. They have competitions. You've got Basque schools where they're really going on learning Basques. And you have a few bloggers and, people on the internet with Basque newsletters where everything Basque is perfect. There is grounds, and we're going to build this. And what is fantastic with Izarra, as Henry pointed out, is that we are hitting, because of the Chartreuse situation, the mixology world. We are hitting on the retail, because retailers don't have any more Chartreuse to be given to them. And then we're going to please the Basques, who are so enthused with their country, their origin, we're bringing back their home product.
Well, one thing that you said that I'm sort of keying into now is that our world is similarly without borders as the Basque country, sort of disregarding the political borders of France and Spain, right? We live the digital world that we inhabit, and a world in which Henry can bring in containers full of Izarra into the United States is one that's maybe a little different than the world that Hemingway was in when he sat down at this cafe and ordered this drink. And so to me, it seems like there's maybe maybe this is a challenge, right? Because one of the words that always follows Basque in international news headlines is separatists, right? Basque separatists want to, they want to maintain, assert or maintain some sort of independence from the political entities of the region. They live in the mountains. They're a close knit kind of community. The reason why I ask about Basque culture is because I'm fascinated by it. I feel like if I knew more Basque people, I would probably really share some cultural affinities with them. But I just don't know all that many things about it. And so this is where bartenders do amazing work. They're the ones who can take the flavors, tell the cultural stories. And so I see this kind of being a great opportunity to get some people sharing more about Basque culture by way of these flavors. Because if you gave me an opportunity to attend some sort of Basque food and drink festival, or even just like a themed night at a bar that has a lot of Basque ingredients, like, I'm there. I want to learn about this and I want to do it through their food and drink because I feel like that's the best way to learn about a culture. So I don't know. Does that seem like it might be part of your strategy with how to teach people about this?
For sure. The
Oh,
biggest thing is because Alain has already talked to people that do Basque newsletters, Basque website. We had to back off because it's like I said, the brand's gone viral on us. We're probably a year out from figuring out how much we need, at which times we need it, who wants it. I mean, our entire idea at first was to get into all the bars. I mean, my people that are friends that are bartenders and have said for the last few years, Henry, because we import a product from Abruzzo, Italy called Centerba. It's the original Centerba, and goes from 1,000-year-old recipe, and it's in this same world. And I had some bartender friends say, "You got to really promote that." This before we took the whole Izarra thing serious. And so I figured, we would be bringing this in, and Alain and I would attack the on-premise community, the people we know, and say, "Here, try this and make cocktails with it." It's where we know the brands are normally built, and it usually comes at a pretty big expense. There's a lot of people that say, "Okay, we need it, we want it," and a lot of portions of that world say, "Well, we'll take a few cases for free," or what's the promo in it, or what's it's an ugly fact of the underbelly of the business, to pay for play. We're not going to have that problem with this product because we're gonna have to allocate it for the next year or so, because I don't know if I bring in 1,000 cases or 5,000 cases, am I going to sell it all? And
Right.
we don't have unlimited funds. We've got to try to maintain a growing business profile with it. And so it'll probably be a while before it'll be in bars, where we thought is where we would start. But so what's happened is just the opposite, is retailers are jumping on it. Retailers, there's no pay, pay to play type thing. There could be with certain programs on large brands, but this is just going to be a shelf stock item. They're not Cordy Brothers in Sacramento. The only one I'm throwing out there, they're floor stacking it.
That's right.
That's how excited they are that it's coming. And that's just amazing to me that a store would immediately want to floor stack it. Just amazing. I've never had that happen with a liqueur. Like I said, 50 years, never had that happen. I never sold a single floor stack of Jaegermeister.
sorry. I wanted just to say one thing about the Basque country. You've got the Spanish part of the Basque country between Bilbao and San Sebastian. Rich, industrial area with harbors, shipping. There was big fishing. The French Basque is a little smaller, but they speak the same language. They are brothers, family, And when you had, and Spain always wanted to put a big lid on the Basque people, because just for the tax, to get taxes as much as out of them as they could. So, and they reacted very much, and they stuck together with their language and then brutally, fought the Spanish government. It's long been said that when there was a problem and the Spanish government was raiding the Basque country on the Spanish side, well, all the weapons would be cleared through or smuggled through the border and hidden in the French Basque country. And then when things smoothen, they would bring back the weapons and on. Now, it's a long past thing, I think. But they still stick together with their culture. And I think this is very important because Izarra rides on this story, on the myth of the Basques being a strong nation. I'm not saying a country, I'm saying a nation because it's a language.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a cultural nation for sure. You can just tell. you know. But that's not that unusual in Europe. You've got these carved out areas that are very strongly influenced by their people and their culture for that area. Like I mentioned earlier, Alsace. I have friends that live very close to Alsace, and in fact, that's an interesting little segue as well, because back in the '70s, my father had an eau de vie line out of the Black Forest. We lost that line. There was some family issues and things, and the company kind of split up to pay off family members, and it was gone. So I said to my father, we should go after Schladerer. Well, Schladerer was the biggest German brand of eau de vie, and it was sold on Japan Airlines and miniatures. It was a well-known German Black Forest eau de vie brand. So my father said, no, they're not going to give that to us. Well, they gave it to us. I made it sort of a passion thing. And they would always tell me, but our eau de vie, this is why it's better. And the French are allowed to sugar their crushed fruit, and it raises the alcohol and this and that. And what did they do? Every time I visited them, they took me to Ricavere to eat and drink French or Alsatian eau de vie, But the Alsatians, they don't view themselves as German or French. They view themselves as Alsatians. The Basque view themselves as Basque. And I guess the closest thing we get in the U.S. is those staunch Texans that view themselves as we're from the Republic of Texas.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's an endlessly interesting historical, cultural, culinary subject to dive into, and I personally, I'm excited for what comes out of that. I hope that you keep me CC'd on any of these events that you put together, because I'm just dying to see what chefs and professional bartenders do with this. Not that I can't think of a few things, but I want to see what the people with the resources who use their brains for this on a daily, weekly basis can do with some of these products when they get into circulation. But you mentioned that it's going to be allocated for probably the next year. That's part of the insane part of this conversation. That's part of the reference to the unicorn that we're making. This has so much potential that we're currently kind of restricting it just a little bit to make sure that we can absolutely pour on all that gas if it is going to take off as much as we think it is. So where will people be able to buy this on liquor store shelves? Are there any particular retailers or particular states that you want to call out, Henry?
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, Total Wine and More and Binny's in Chicago, they wasted no time. They saw it was available and they wasted no time. Cordy Brothers in Sacramento, immediately, no time. It would be unfair to say that a huge number of independent retailers won't do the same. It's just they're busy with the everyday of running their business, because that's what they are, an independent retailer, versus the larger companies like a Binny's. Of course, we know Brett Pantani at Binny's is always on top of everything. I mean, he's so engaged in small brands and finding unicorns for Binny's that's why he spent virtually his entire career being their buyer. And companies like Total just have a lot of data. I mean, yeah. It's envious. I'd love to see the data, and every once in a while you can have a meeting with them, and they'll say, "Well, no, we know where something sells and where we want it," and as it shifts, they have all that data from when it shifts. Like when it shifted from COVID from wines to spirits, they've redone their stores and moved spirits to the front of the store.
Right.
But there are certainly players that I think we just don't have enough to chase everybody, and we can get enough, but and I suppose if I'd have been blessed like Sidney Frank with a wife who was an heiress from Shendley and had that fortune, I'd probably go in and see if I can buy the Izarra brand and build it, but that isn't the case. So it's not that there's a real shortage. This isn't like the monks. This is a business. They'd love to sell as much as Chartreuse sells, and I mean, we'll see what history gives us on there. But if history tells me anything, it's going to be substantial because while it took a long time to build Luxardo, Luxardo's substantial. I mean,
Right.
there aren't very many bars that don't have a bottle of Luxardo. If this brand simply gets to where it's sort of a staple for bars, which is where Campari was for decades and decades before the whole Negroni craze took off. They were selling 20,000 cases a year just because people had a bottle under the bar. Somebody would come in, like somebody like Henry, that orders a Campari and soda because you can drink them all night and still walk. And so if something like that happens with Izarra for us, we'll have a 20,000 case brand. I've never had a 20,000 case brand. 50 years, I've never had that. So I think it's got a huge potential, but the world's going to tell that story. We won't be able to make that story happen outside of being engaged, like what the opportunity you're giving us. Different opportunities come along. We do have some people that we want to engage that Alain found that do a newsletter about food and Basque culture and history. And, we had to pull back from promoting on them. I go, what are we promoting? I mean, we're selling everything we bring in right now. So we don't want to over promote until, we have such a distribution that when you're promoting, because often what will happen is we get an opportunity, somebody interviews us or writes something on us about one of our products, and then people start requesting it, and I don't have a distributor in that state. So it's
Right.
I mean, I just had somebody request our Catalonian Spanish vermouth in Vermont. Now that happens to work out because it's a liquor control state. They'll special order it for that for the account. But if it's a liquor control state that doesn't special order, or a state where we might not have a distributor willing to bring in a small quantity of something, then that's kind of where it ends until we build it. That's
Right.
not the case here. Today I wrapped up the last distributor, a holdout. Everybody's super busy with the holidays, but I'm pushing everybody because the shipment came in and we need to get it out. And we wrapped up Minnesota today. That was the last state where I didn't have a distributor committed.
Wow. So suffice it to say, if you need any help finding Izarra on liquor store shelves, you can, of course, get in touch with me, and we'll. If I can't point you to one of the bigger players, then maybe we can shoot off
your market. That's another one that got wrapped
coming
up.
into DC.
It's coming to DC, Maryland, Delaware.
Oh, okay.
O-Pee-Chee Distributing is going to be handling it in all those three markets.
All right. So DC, Maryland bartenders be on notice. O-Pee-Chee, you can place your orders there. And that's super exciting. But yeah, if anybody this is early days, but we're hoping it's the early explosion that leads to a great further prolonged explosion of more extensive distribution on and off premise for the Izarra family. Before we head off here, I realize that we've neglected one thing, and that thing is Izarra 5.4. This is something I ran across in my research. It doesn't appear to be part of the current portfolio. It does appear to be roughly the same proof as Green Chartreuse. What is this product, and how do we think about it either historically or potentially in the future?
Well, I've been digging the information. The brand was bought many years ago by Cointreau, the Remy Cointreau, but it was Cointreau at the time. And it was not a priority. It was not a big thing. And then one gentleman from the group got enthused about this brand and asked to buy it. Remy Cointreau said no, but you can go there and try and revive it. And the guy was clever enough to make his researches, compare it to Chartreuse, and he found out that without having a lot of written proof, First of all, Izarra was a kind of elixir made in those farms here and there, not in a convent, okay? And then, before it came to the Izarra we know today, there was another stage. It's no proof about that, but it seems obvious when you read the story of Chartreuse and Genepi and the others that there has been an intermediary liqueur at high proof. And he decided to give a kick, a booster to the brand by getting the 54. So it's something that this guy appropriated himself to do. Does it have a real historical origin? No, or we don't know. And the current owners, for the time being, they're a little reluctant to say, let's go for it. Now, there's a marketing decision. It could be fun, but I think Henry will stick, and I were going to stick to what exists because this is a historical data that we have.
Right.
Yeah, you have a situation where when the Cointreau family, who now controls the global distribution of the brand, when they launched the 54 back in the 90s, it didn't do very well. So the argument is, why would we want to launch it again? We already bombed with it. It didn't sell very well. What you see in stores in France, if you can find it, is old inventory that didn't sell very well. That's a different world. Like I said, if I'd have brought in Izarra 5 years ago, we probably would have sold 100, 200 cases a year. This year, just because of what it is, and I didn't know what we would do, we'll finish the year selling 2,000 cases, for a brand new product. So that's a brand new product that's got a raised level of attention. You can always hang something onto that because bartenders want it, and you could actually, I will be talking to them. They've given me an unequivocal no. They do not want to launch that. In the face of that, the Cointreau family owns another brand called Verte de Verlet, which is also very historical and has always been at that strength. And so, of course, I don't want to see that brand at a different company. I'd rather see it at this company. So and to me, it's still a separate issue. It's a separate issue. I don't, for Verte de Verlet, have a groundswell of people that immediately want to jump on it that we had with this product. So it's going to take a different path, even if it has a rightful place in that herbal space, that plant liqueur space. And it's a delicious product. I imported it. Alain lined it up for me 20 years ago, 15, 20 years ago. I mean, we brought it in. It was fantastic product. I like those things. I'm German. Germans like bitter liqueurs, like the Italians, or the spicy, the kind of robust liqueurs that they are. And the French have a unique knack for making fantastic liqueurs. What you tend to find in the rest of the world is those type of liqueurs are much sweeter. And today, our bartenders would rather decide how sweet a cocktail should be that they want to make.
Right.
And so you need a really good quality base spirit for that to give the flavor you want, and then you build on it. So I find that the products that are not always, but a lot of the products that are offered to us are just incredibly sweet. And, the French seem to have a solution for that because they either do liqueurs or they do crèmes, right? So if you're going to do a berry, a cassis, or, or a framboise liqueur, raspberry liqueur, blueberry liqueur, blackberry liqueur, and you do it as a crème, because those fruits don't carry sugar.
Right.
thing. So yeah, there's, it's interesting. And I mean, and what's also interesting, we can wrap this up. I know your time is coming up on it, is that from my old company to this company, we went from a company that was very heavy and entrenched and lots of amazing whiskeys. And in this company, we felt, well, we've got to get a lot of amazing whiskeys, and we picked up a lot of them, and they're very hard to sell. And the real thrust is in the liqueurs and the modifiers. And that is absolutely because of bartenders. Of course, consumers learn from bartenders, oh, this tastes great. And then they go to retail stores and buy things and make drinks and things. And so I've seen such a shift over, 15 or so years from this whiskey phenomenon, which has not gone away. We know how well bourbons and those things sell. But I tell you, liqueurs never did what they're doing today.
And through
I think that's certainly the case with our audience.
And through COVID, people started to make cocktails at home.
Yep, absolutely.
And that's going to stay.
Well, I know it's here to stay in my home. And Alain, Henry, thank you so much for taking the time to share these amazing flavors with me. I think the story, it's a long, interesting story with some interesting little rabbit holes to dive into, but it's a story that's still being written. So we're excited. I speak on behalf of my audience. I know my audience is excited to get their hands on some of these bottles. I know they'll get in touch with me if they have any issues locating them, and you and I can work together to point them toward the venue that's easiest for them. And I just want to raise a glass to you both with a little Izarra Verte and say cheers and thank you for being my guests here on the Modern Bar Cart podcast.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, there's two big things you can do for us here at Modern Bar Cart. One would be to tell your friends and family if you think they'd enjoy listening to us talk about cocktails. And if they don't download podcasts, they can always stream our episodes on their desktop directly from the show notes page at modernbarcart.com. The other thing you can do to help would be to head on over to iTunes or wherever you download your podcasts and leave us a review. 5 stars are great, but we're more interested in your feedback. And the beauty is, the more reviews we have, the easier it will be for other folks out there to learn about our show. We're trying to start a cocktail revolution here, and by spreading the word, you're helping us fight the good fight. You can always reach us by emailing podcast@modernbarcart.com if you're looking for cocktail or bartending advice, or if you're a pro who would like to pull up a mic and be interviewed for all to hear. Also, definitely follow us on Instagram and Facebook @modernbarcart for cocktail porn, recipes, and entertaining tips. And keep an eye out for new product releases and special offers, which are happening all the time. We love our listeners, and we really enjoy giving you exclusive discounts and sneak peeks at our latest and greatest cocktail projects. This episode may be over, but for you, the mixological fun and adventures are just beginning, so remember, folks, drink responsibly and experiment boldly. This episode was made possible with editing and sound design by Samantha Reed, herbal liqueur history and insights courtesy of Henry Preiss and Alain, and a little bit of interview magic by yours truly. This has been a production of the Modern Bar Cart podcast, copyright 2023.